have a panel of four women. I guess I count myself here as well to share their experiences as international students.
Hi, everybody. I'm Nishla. I graduated in 2019. I graduated from NYU and I studied psychology and economics. Where I'm from is very complicated, but long story short, I lived half my life in California, half my life in India, in Pune. But I'm still an F1 student, so I totally empathize with international student struggles. And I'm currently working in New York in media and analytics.
Super cool. Shruti, what about you?
Sure. So I graduated at the same time with Nishla in May 2019 from NYU with a bachelor's in maths and economics. I have grown up between Delhi and Dubai, and currently my parents still live in Dubai. And for my work, I'm currently working in finance at Goldman Sachs within their quantitative strategies.
Great. And then Janvi, what about you?
Hi, I'm from New Delhi, India, and I graduated from NYU in May of 2020, and I majored in economics, and I also studied environmental studies, computer science, and math and business studies, and I'm currently working at better.com as a data analyst. So yeah, just recently graduated last year. I was looking for jobs during COVID, which was an experience in itself.
But when you guys were recruiting, if you're recruiting during a pandemic or elsewise, what was that process for each of you? Maybe we can just go one by one.
I think I was the one who was like mostly looking for jobs during the pandemic when it had just hit, because I remember that we it was this time last year and we were still in our dorms at NYU, and we had been given that notice of like 48 hours to clear our dorms and like go back home and pack everything. And of course at that time, you kind of have to do that like risk analysis of whether you want to like have jeopardize your visa status, but you also want to go home because it's COVID and it's a pandemic and it's scary. So all of that process was kind of hard, but I made the decision to go back home, and I kind of did all my classes from home and did recruiting from home. And I think it was definitely different because of the time difference. Like I was giving interviews and everything at 2 a.m., 3 in the morning. And obviously it's different when it's like their morning and then you're up at night, like giving interviews. But I think that something that really helped me was like, I was filtering out like on LinkedIn, like using specific keywords, like for the roles that I'm specifically interested in, for example, like 0 to 2 years of work experience, because that if it's 1+ or 2+, they're not even going to look at your resume.
No, going off of what Johnny said about compartmentalization, I realized that you just have to be hyper organized. And also with jobs, it really is a game of numbers. I know people hear that a lot. I applied for a total of 350, 400 jobs. I didn't have a job after graduation. So for like 2 months, I was just at it, like sending out applications. So just one I would say is have your Excel and kind of like list down all the jobs that you're interested in, and then figure out like what are some like top 10 or 15 that you really, really want. Because networking, a lot of people talk about networking, but it can be so haphazard. Like, who do you network with? How many cold messages do you send? Like, how do you contact people? So I think a good priority is just figuring out what jobs you really want, and then sending, like, I would send cold messages on LinkedIn to people, and a lot of times they responded. So it really did work. And then slowly, I realized that the more applications you send out and tailor kind of your cover letter as much as you can, you do hear back. Like, yeah, I sent out 400 job applications and maybe I heard back from like 20 recruiters, but there is hope. And so you really just got to keep going at it.
What kept you motivated, or how did you approach rejections?
I would say over here, rejection sucks, but then the more that you get, which you probably will get, you get more used to it. But my biggest piece of advice is email them back and always ask for feedback, and like kind of leave it on good terms. I would always ask them, do you have any feedback? Is there any way that I can improve my application? 9 out of 10 times by company policy, they can't give you feedback and they might not respond. But then 1 out of 10 times, some really nice recruiters do, and they'll tell you straight up. Like I had someone tell me, oh, like we love your energy, but then we just felt like you didn't have the technical skills for this role. And thanks to that, I knew exactly what to work on.
Yeah, I think that about rejections, like obviously it's hard because when you're an international student, I remember there was this one company that I had applied to, and I got a rejection where it was like, oh, like they scheduled an interview and I had already given my availability for the interview. But then after, I think closer to the date, they're like, oh, I'm sorry, we have to cancel the interview because you don't have the correct like visa status. So then that was hard because, you know that you were qualified enough to move to the interview stage and the process, but because your visa doesn't fit the category, it's like, okay, you can't really move forward. So I think that a couple of like rejections like that really get to you, and it's so important to kind of remind yourself that it's not a level playing field. So you have to work harder than the people who don't have that barrier.
How are you actually building a relationship with these people and able to maybe get a referral or to get a foot in or to get that first initial conversation on the phone?
So I think what I would recommend there is trying to find a common point between you and the person you're reaching out to. It could either be the broadest category would be the same school that you've gone to, or say they've mentioned out a club that they were part of on campus. You can reach out to through that and be like, hey, I was interested in this. And then when you're reaching out, don't ask for a job or don't ask for an internship. Ask them about their work, because they would love to explain what they do. And that is also useful for you to understand whether the job description actually matches what the job is day to day.
It's so much of it is about genuine interest. Now that like we're on the other side of the thing where we're working in jobs, and when we get network connection requests, I can see the difference between people who kind of, and I understand, who are just like desperate to get any job, that they don't really care so much about like what it is, and they just really want a referral, as opposed to people who are genuinely interested in what kind of work do you do, and want to talk about what I would be passionate about. And I feel like it's much easier to connect with that.
Let's take it one step further and say, now you've been able to get through your network or through the clubs, etc., your applications and interview. How do you prepare for that interview?
I'd say connect. See if you can reach out to someone, even amongst your friend groups or alumni, who might have interned at that place before, to understand what kind of questions do they typically ask, so that you might be able to prepare for the technical questions that the company would be looking for. But what about the culture of the company that you want to highlight in your interview is super important as well.
Going off of that, like I think for obviously like technical rounds, that it's totally dependent on like your skills and everything. But I think for behavioral interviews, for a lot of those, like networking is a good aspect, because when you reach out to people working in the same company and you kind of introduce yourself and say that you're interested in this role and you're interviewing, I think that even the other side is like pretty helpful, is what I've noticed whenever I've reached out to someone, and you are usually responsive and are pretty open to like scheduling a call and answering my questions, and are willing to talk about the company culture. And then I think one thing that I think somebody told me was that if you like have an interview and you mention during the interview that I spoke to so and so from this company in this department, and then they mentioned, so it's like kind of like name dropping during the interview, which shows that you've done your research. And I think that that's super helpful when it comes to talking about behavioral rounds. And then for technicals, yeah, I feel like you could just ask the same person what kind of questions they ask, and kind of go off of that. But yeah, that is super helpful. I think networking before an interview is pretty important, I would say.
No, that's great. And go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say, adding on to the behavioral round aspect, I think that also before any of your interviews, I think taking a step back to figure out what is my story, because there's so many people, like if they're applying for jobs, and it's very easy to kind of get lost in the weeds of like more superficial accomplishments. But taking a step to figure out what is my story, why am I here today, and what have I done in the past, where am I from, and how does that all kind of shape who I am, and why am I here. So I think having that cliched as is, but that elevator pitch or your story, and practicing it every day when you're like in the shower, brushing your teeth, and really nailing that piece down. So when you go for any interview, so that you can kind of shape it and just talk about who you are, because tell me about yourself is probably the one question that's asked in every single interview, and just nailing that will really, really show and help you stand out.
This has been a really tough time for international students, with working remotely, like you said earlier, having to decide between being at home or being here, between the visa status in the future. It's just to have a lot of anxiety within our community. Do you guys have any advice? I know one of you is recruiting during COVID, other guys have been working remotely during COVID, but advice for students who might be sitting at home right now, feeling a little bit of animosity with the recruitment coming up, and maybe some of them don't have a job lined up yet.
I think one thing they could do, for at least for the networking aspect, that instead of scheduling a phone call, ask if the person would be comfortable with a Zoom call, because then you would still get that face-to-face interaction, except it would be virtual, but it would still be like if you were meeting them at their office to go over what they do.
Yeah, no, totally. I think that one thing that really helped me during like remotely recruiting from home was to, I know that we talked about like the networking aspect where you kind of send an email with like, you know, specific messages to people. But I think at that point, I was at that level where I was just sending messages to anyone who would be willing to give me advice, and, you know, really sending out messages to like more number of people so that my response rate increases. And I did that, and I sent like the same kind of canned response kind of a thing, because I mean, it's not the best strategy, but I think at a point you have to figure out like what works for you. And that actually ended up working for me, because this like VP of this one investment management boutique company actually responded, and she was super helpful. She was just my mentor throughout the whole process. She was like very willing to set up a Zoom call with me. I had a video call with her at 5 a.m. India time.
I think this is slightly more philosophical, but what kept me sane after I graduated, I was crushed. I felt like I had failed in some way of like not being able to have a job before graduating. And I think what I had to keep remembering was that I know it feels like it's the end of the world and that everything hinges on like your OPT and this one job and being able to like stay in the States or wherever you're trying to stay. But I think just remembering that there's always another way to getting what you want. I met incredible people with incredible backgrounds who've for whatever reason had to, go back to their home country, but they did something spectacular there. They followed something that they were passionate about, and they were able to like come back. They came for a master's, or they got transferred through their company. It's just, life is just so long and we can't anticipate everything. And I think a lot of people I spoke to, really the common theme was for getting a job or where they're working is, oh, I stumbled upon this. You never know what could end up happening. And I think just remembering that you are worthy and capable, and especially if you're an international student, so many things are out of your control: immigration law, luck, if the company accepts like you or not. There's so many things that you can't control. So just focus on doing what you care about and continuing to apply and continuing to care. And you never know, like, again, life is so long and things really might just work out in the end in unexpected ways.
Something that the reason we do these with Onboard is taking example of today's panel. You've got 3 international students all successfully working in New York City after graduating. Some are recruited during a pandemic, working remotely. Like, these are all obstacles that students who are looking for jobs right now are thinking about ahead of time. So to be able to put people in front of them and say, these are examples, these are international students, maybe you didn't have a job, you applied to 400 jobs, or you got rejected and you found yourself a mentor on LinkedIn. Whatever the situation may be, somebody watching this can say, hey, this is somebody I identify with. They had the same visa situation as me. They had the same timeline that I had. Maybe they went to the same school I did, or they're from the same country that I'm from, and they figured out their path in 3 different ways, which is like what we want to share, that no, there's no one track record for every student, and things can change. And we hope that people watching this, get some sort of peace of mind that there's still a lot of hope and things to stay motivated for. Hopefully, if anyone's comfortable connecting with you guys one-on-one on LinkedIn, if they're interested in your companies or learning about you, maybe you're comfortable if they reach out.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sounds good.
Great. Thank you guys so much.